Captain Marcus Rodriguez had been flying F-16s for 12 years, but he'd never seen anything like the chaos unfolding over the Nevada desert that Tuesday morning. The scramble alert had come in at 6:47 hours sharp, sending his squadron racing toward their jets while the klaxons wailed across Nellis Air Force Base. Unknown aircraft had violated restricted airspace near the Yucca Mountain facility, and initial radar readings suggested multiple bogies moving at impossible speeds. Marcus strapped himself into his Fighting Falcon, his hands moving through the familiar pre-flight sequence with practiced precision. His wingman, Lieutenant Jake Thompson, was already taxiing toward the runway, their radio chatter crisp and professional despite the urgency. The base had been on high alert for weeks following intelligence reports of foreign surveillance attempts, and everyone knew this could be the real deal. As they climbed through 20,000 feet, Marcus scanned the desert landscape below. The morning sun cast long shadows across the barren terrain, and he could make out the distinctive geometric patterns of the restricted testing zones. His radar operator, Technical Sergeant Amy Chen, had been tracking the unknown contacts from the command center, feeding real-time updates through his headset. Viper 1, this is Control. Bogies are holding position at grid reference 77 Alpha. Maintain current heading and prepare for visual identification, came the voice of Colonel Patricia Williams, their squadron commander. Marcus acknowledged the transmission and adjusted his course, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He'd been part of numerous intercept missions over the years, but something about this one felt different. The radar signatures were unlike anything in their threat database, and the objects seemed to be exhibiting flight characteristics that defied conventional physics. Lieutenant Thompson's voice crackled through the radio, tension evident despite his attempts to maintain professional composure. "Marcus, are you seeing these readings? These things are pulling maneuvers that should tear any aircraft apart." As they approached the target area, Marcus began his descent, following standard intercept protocols. The landscape below was a maze of classified facilities and underground installations, all part of the military's most sensitive research programs. He'd flown over this area countless times during training exercises, but today everything felt charged with an electric tension that made his skin crawl. The radar contact grew stronger as they closed distance, and Marcus prepared to switch to visual identification. His training had covered every possible scenario, from foreign military aircraft to civilian planes that had strayed off course. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to witness in the clear Nevada sky. His finger hovered over the weapons systems selector, waiting for the command to engage. The rules of engagement were clear, and he'd followed them without question throughout his career. But in the next few moments, Everything he thought he knew about military protocol and chain of command would be turned upside down. The desert stretched endlessly below them, keeping its secrets buried in the sand, while two F-16s screamed through the morning air, racing toward an encounter that would change everything for Captain Marcus Rodriguez and his unwavering faith in the system he'd sworn to serve. Marcus reduced throttle as they entered the target zone, his eyes sweeping the horizon for any sign of the unknown aircraft. The radar was painting clear contacts, but visual identification remained elusive. The morning haze created a shimmering effect across the desert, making it difficult to distinguish between actual objects and atmospheric distortions. Control, this is Viper 1. I'm not getting visual on the bogies. Radar shows multiple contacts, but I'm not seeing anything up here, Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the growing confusion. Colonel Williams' response came immediately. Viper 1, maintain position. We're showing solid returns on our scopes. The contacts are definitely there. Lieutenant Thompson had spread out to provide better coverage, his F-16 maintaining a parallel course about 2 miles to the east. Marcus, I'm getting some weird readings on my threat warning system. It's like these things are actively jamming our electronics. As they continued their search pattern, Marcus noticed something unusual in his peripheral vision. A thin trail of smoke was rising from the desert floor, barely visible against the morning sky. It wasn't the thick black smoke of a crash, but rather a pale, almost translucent column that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The smoke trail was coming from an area that Marcus recognized immediately. It was the old bombing range, a section of desert that had been used for weapons testing decades ago, but had been officially decommissioned for years. The military had supposedly cleared all the unexploded ordnance from the area, but Marcus knew that cleanup operations were never perfect. "Jake, are you seeing that smoke trail at 2 o'clock?" Marcus asked, adjusting his heading slightly to get a better view. "I see it. Looks like it's coming from the old range. Think we've got a brush fire down there." Marcus was about to respond when his radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Colonel Williams. "Viper 1, we need you to investigate those radar contacts immediately. This is a priority 1 situation." The urgency in his commander's voice was unmistakable, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The smoke trail was growing thicker, and he could now make out what appeared to be debris scattered across the desert floor. His training told him to follow orders without question, but his instincts were screaming that the real story was happening on the ground, not in the air. As he banked toward the coordinates where the radar contacts were supposedly located, Marcus made a decision that would fundamentally alter the course of his military career. Instead of blindly following the intercept vector, He began a gradual descent toward the source of the smoke trail, his curiosity overriding his adherence to protocol. The desert floor rushed up to meet him as he dropped altitude, and what he saw through his canopy made his blood run cold. The smoke wasn't coming from a brush fire or even unexploded ordnance. It was rising from the scattered remains of what appeared to be a civilian aircraft, its twisted metal gleaming in the morning sun like a metallic grave marker in the vast Nevada wilderness. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized the distinctive livery of a small private plane. The aircraft had been torn apart, its pieces scattered across several hundred yards of desert terrain. But what made the scene even more disturbing was the complete absence of any emergency response vehicles or personnel. If this plane had crashed recently enough to still be smoking, where were the search and rescue teams? His radio suddenly came alive with Colonel Williams' voice, sharp and commanding. "Viper 1, you are ordered to return to your assigned intercept course immediately. Do not deviate from your mission parameters." Marcus hesitated, his thumb hovering over the radio transmit button. The wreckage below looked fresh, possibly from the last 24 hours. Someone could still be alive down there, waiting for rescue. But his commanding officer had just given him a direct order, and disobeying a direct order in combat situations was a court-martial offense. "Colonel, I've got what appears to be a civilian aircraft crash site down here. The wreckage is still smoking. Request permission to investigate for survivors." The silence that followed Marcus's transmission stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Colonel Williams finally responded, her voice carried a tone he'd never heard before, cold, calculating, and absolutely final. "Viper 1, there is no aircraft crash in your area. You are seeing atmospheric distortions. Return to your assigned mission immediately. That is a direct order." Marcus stared down at the wreckage, his mind racing. The debris field was clearly visible, undeniably real, and definitely not an atmospheric distortion. Pieces of the aircraft's fuselage were scattered across the desert floor, and he could make out what appeared to be personal belongings mixed in with the twisted metal. Lieutenant Thompson's voice cut through his confusion. "Marcus, what's going on? I'm getting some strange radio chatter on the emergency frequencies. Something about a missing civilian aircraft that departed from Henderson Executive Airport yesterday evening." The pieces began falling into place in Marcus's mind, forming a picture that made his hands shake on the control stick. A civilian aircraft had gone missing, and now he was looking at fresh wreckage in a restricted military zone. His commanding officer was denying the existence of the crash site and ordering him away from the area. The mysterious radar contacts that had launched their scramble mission were nowhere to be found. Marcus realized he was facing a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could follow orders, pretend he'd never seen the wreckage, and return to base to file a routine mission report. Or he could trust his conscience and investigate what was clearly a recent aircraft accident, regardless of the consequences to his career. The smoke trail continued to rise from the desert floor, a silent plea for help that only he could answer. His training had taught him to obey orders without question, but his humanity demanded that he at least try to determine if anyone had survived the crash. As he circled the wreckage site, Marcus noticed something that made his decision for him. Partially hidden beneath a section of the aircraft's wing, he could make out what appeared to be a person lying motionless in the sand. The figure was too far away to determine if they were alive or dead, but the possibility that someone might still be breathing down there made it impossible for him to simply fly away. Marcus keyed his radio with grim determination. "Colonel, I have a visual on what appears to be a survivor at the crash site. I'm going to orbit the area and call for search and rescue." The response came back immediately, Colonel Williams' voice sharp with authority. "Viper 1, you will cease this line of inquiry immediately. There is no crash site, there are no survivors, and you will return to base now. Any further deviation from orders will result in immediate disciplinary action." Marcus felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd served his country faithfully for over a decade, following orders without question and building a reputation as a reliable, by-the-book officer. But looking down at the wreckage and the motionless figure in the sand, he realized that some things were more important than following orders. "Jake, I need you to return to base and file a flight plan deviation report. Tell them I experienced a mechanical issue and had to make an emergency landing." "Marcus, what the hell are you doing? You can't just—" "Someone's alive down there, Jake. I can't just leave them." Lieutenant Thompson's voice carried a mixture of admiration and concern. "You know this is going to destroy your career, right? Williams isn't going to let this slide." Marcus was already beginning his descent toward a flat section of desert near the crash site. His F-16 wasn't designed for rough field landings, but he'd trained for emergency situations and knew he could put the aircraft down safely if he was careful. "Some things are more important than careers, Jake. Get back to base and make sure someone knows what really happened out here." As Marcus lined up his approach, he could see the crash site more clearly. The aircraft appeared to be a small business jet, possibly a Citation or similar model. The impact had been severe, but the fact that parts of the fuselage were still intact gave him hope that someone might have survived. The desert floor rushed up to meet his landing gear, and Marcus felt the familiar thump of touchdown. He'd successfully landed his F-16 on an unprepared surface, something that would normally be considered a significant achievement. but all he could think about was reaching the crash site and determining if the person he'd seen was still alive. As he shut down his engines and popped his canopy, the silence of the Nevada desert enveloped him. The only sounds were the ticking of cooling metal and the distant whisper of wind across the sand. Marcus climbed out of his aircraft and began jogging toward the wreckage, his flight suit heavy and uncomfortable in the desert heat. The crash site was even more devastating up close. The aircraft had obviously hit the ground at high speed, and the fact that any part of it remained recognizable was remarkable. Marcus approached the figure he'd seen from the air, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The person was a woman, probably in her 40s, wearing what appeared to be business attire. She was unconscious but breathing, her pulse weak but steady. Marcus quickly checked for obvious injuries and was relieved to find that while she was clearly hurt, her injuries didn't appear to be immediately life-threatening. As he worked to make her more comfortable, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The woman was wearing a security badge from the Department of Energy, and her briefcase, which had been thrown clear of the wreckage, was lying open nearby. Papers had scattered across the desert floor, and Marcus could make out official letterhead and classification markings. He realized he was looking at what appeared to be a government contractor or official who had been carrying classified documents. The implications hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a civilian aircraft accident. This was potentially a major security incident that someone was trying to cover up. Marcus heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. His radio crackled with an incoming transmission, but instead of Colonel Williams' voice, he heard an unfamiliar man speaking with crisp authority. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Colonel James Mitchell from Base Security. You are ordered to step away from the crash site immediately and return to your aircraft. A recovery team is en route to handle the situation." Marcus looked down at the unconscious woman, then at the scattered classified documents blowing across the desert floor. The approaching helicopter was moving fast, and he could make out the distinctive silhouette of a Black Hawk against the morning sky. "Colonel Mitchell, I have an injured survivor here who needs immediate medical attention. I'm going to stay with her until the paramedics arrive." "Captain Rodriguez, you are not authorized to be at that location. Return to your aircraft immediately, or you will be considered in violation of national security protocols." The threat was clear, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to leave the injured woman alone. He'd already crossed the line by landing at the crash site, and he knew that his military career was effectively over regardless of what he did next. The only question was whether he'd be able to live with himself if he walked away now. As the Black Hawk settled onto the desert floor about 100 yards away, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He gathered up as many of the scattered documents as he could reach, stuffing them into his flight suit pockets. If someone was trying to cover up this accident, he wanted to make sure there was evidence of what had really happened. The helicopter disgorged a team of men in black tactical gear, their faces hidden behind dark glasses and communication headsets. They moved with military precision, but Marcus noticed they weren't wearing any unit insignia or name tags. These weren't regular Air Force personnel. The team leader approached Marcus with confident strides, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "Captain Rodriguez, I'm Agent David Harper with the Department of Homeland Security. This is now a federal crime scene, and I need you to step back while we secure the area." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The woman was still unconscious, and he could see that her breathing was becoming more labored. This woman needs medical attention immediately. Where are the paramedics? Agent Harper's expression didn't change. "The situation is under control, Captain. We have medical personnel standing by. Now I need you to return to your aircraft and prepare for immediate departure." "I'm not leaving until I know she's going to be okay." The agent's hand moved slightly closer to his weapon. "Captain Rodriguez, you are interfering with a federal investigation. I'm ordering you to return to your aircraft. This is not a request." Marcus realized he was facing a situation that was far more complex than a simple aircraft accident. The speed with which the federal agents had arrived, the lack of standard emergency response protocols, and the obvious attempt to remove him from the scene all pointed to something much larger than he'd initially understood. As he looked around at the tactical team setting up a perimeter around the crash site, Marcus noticed something that made his heart sink. The agents weren't just securing the area, they were preparing to sanitize it. He could see them laying out what appeared to be incendiary devices near the largest pieces of wreckage. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They weren't here to investigate the crash. They were here to destroy the evidence. The unconscious woman, the classified documents, the entire incident was going to disappear into the Nevada desert as if it had never happened. Marcus felt the weight of the documents in his pockets and made a silent promise to the unconscious woman. Whatever was happening here, whatever conspiracy had led to her aircraft crashing in a restricted military zone, he would make sure the truth eventually came to light. Agent Harper was still waiting for his compliance, but Marcus had already made his decision. He would return to his aircraft as ordered, but he wouldn't forget what he'd seen. And he certainly wouldn't let the evidence he'd gathered disappear along with everything else. As he walked back toward his F-16, Marcus heard the woman stir behind him. She was regaining consciousness. which meant she might be able to provide answers about what had really happened. But as he turned to look back, he saw Agent Harper kneeling beside her, and he knew that whatever she might have been able to tell him would never see the light of day. The next few hours would be the most important of Marcus's life, and he knew that every decision he made from this point forward would have consequences that reached far beyond his military career. The documents in his pockets felt like they were burning through the fabric, and he knew that possessing classified materials without authorization was a federal crime that could land him in prison for decades. But as he climbed back into his fighter jet and prepared for takeoff, Marcus Rodriguez knew that some secrets were too important to keep, regardless of the personal cost. The woman's face was burned into his memory, and he was determined to find out who she was and why someone had wanted her dead. The flight back to Nellie's Air Force Base passed in a blur of radio chatter and routine procedures, but Marcus's mind was racing with questions that demanded answers. As he taxied toward his assigned parking spot, he could see Colonel Williams waiting for him on the tarmac, her expression grim and unforgiving. Marcus knew that the confrontation ahead would determine whether he spent the rest of his life as a hero or a traitor, and he was no longer certain there was a meaningful difference between the two. The debriefing room was sterile and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and tired. Marcus sat across from Colonel Williams, Agent Harper, and two other men in dark suits who had introduced themselves simply as federal investigators. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the kind of electricity that comes before a serious storm. Colonel Williams opened the proceedings with a statement that Marcus had been expecting. "Captain Rodriguez, you are being charged with disobeying a direct order, unauthorized deviation from assigned mission parameters, and potential violation of national security protocols. Do you understand the seriousness of these charges?" Marcus nodded, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "I understand, Colonel. I also understand that I witnessed what appeared to be a civilian aircraft accident, and I observed federal agents preparing to destroy evidence at the crash site." Agent Harper leaned forward, his voice cold and professional. "Captain, you were not authorized to be at that location. Any observations you think you made are classified, and discussing them with unauthorized personnel would constitute a federal crime. So we're just going to pretend that woman doesn't exist, that her plane didn't crash in a restricted area." One of the unnamed federal investigators spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Captain Rodriguez, there was no aircraft accident. Your flight data recorder shows that you experienced a mechanical malfunction and made an emergency landing. You were on the ground for approximately 47 minutes while you troubleshot the problem, then returned to base. That is the official record." Marcus felt his temper beginning to rise. "You're asking me to lie in my official report, to pretend I didn't see what I saw." Colonel Williams' expression softened slightly, and Marcus could see genuine regret in her eyes. "Marcus, I've known you for 6 years. You're a good officer and you've served your country with distinction. But sometimes serving your country means accepting that there are things you can't understand, situations that are bigger than any one person." That woman was carrying classified documents. She was hurt, possibly dying, and you people were preparing to burn the evidence. How is that serving my country? Agent Harper's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Captain, you are not cleared to discuss the contents of any documents you may have observed. In fact, if you removed any materials from the crash site, you would be in violation of federal law." Marcus felt the documents in his pockets like they were made of molten lead. He'd been hoping they wouldn't ask directly, but now he was facing a direct question about whether he'd taken anything from the scene. "I observed what appeared to be official government documents scattered around the crash site. I was concerned that classified materials might be compromised." "That's not what I asked, Captain. Did you remove any documents from the crash site?" The silence stretched for nearly a minute as Marcus weighed his options. He could lie and hope they didn't search him, but that would only make his situation worse when they inevitably discovered the truth. Or he could admit what he'd done and face the consequences. "I gathered some papers that appeared to be blowing away in the wind. I was concerned about security." Agent Harper nodded grimly. "I need you to surrender those documents immediately." Marcus reached into his pockets and pulled out the papers he'd stuffed there, placing them on the table between them. As Agent Harper began sorting through them, Marcus could see his expression growing more serious with each page. "Captain Rodriguez, these documents are classified at the highest levels. Unauthorized possession of these materials is a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison. I was trying to protect classified materials from being compromised. That's supposed to be part of my job." One of the unnamed investigators spoke up again. "Captain, what you stumbled onto today is part of an ongoing national security operation. The woman you saw was not a victim. She was a person of interest in a federal investigation. Her aircraft was not accidentally crashed. It was intercepted and forced down as part of an authorized operation." Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. "You're telling me that you shot down a civilian aircraft?" "I'm telling you that you witnessed the conclusion of a long-term investigation into the theft of classified materials. The woman you saw was attempting to sell nuclear research data to foreign agents. Her aircraft was carrying evidence of her treason." The room fell silent as Marcus processed this information. If what they were telling him was true, then the woman he'd tried to help was a spy, and the documents he'd gathered were evidence of her crimes. But something about the story didn't add up. If she was a spy, why was she traveling with the documents? Why not just transmit the information electronically? Agent Harper smiled grimly. Because she was smart enough to know that electronic communications can be monitored, she was planning to hand over physical copies of the documents to her handlers. And you just happened to know exactly where she was going to crash. We forced her aircraft down using electronic warfare systems. The crash site was selected to minimize civilian casualties while ensuring the documents could be recovered. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. You murdered her. We prevented a major breach of national security. The woman survived the crash, and she's currently in federal custody receiving medical treatment. I want to see her. That's not possible, Captain. She's being held at a secure facility, and you don't have clearance for that information. Marcus realized he was trapped in a situation that was far more complex than he'd initially understood. If the federal agents were telling the truth, then he'd inadvertently interfered with a legitimate counterintelligence operation. But if they were lying, then he'd witnessed a murder and was now being threatened into silence. Colonel Williams leaned forward, her voice taking on a more personal tone. Marcus, I know this is difficult to accept, but sometimes protecting our country requires us to make hard choices. The woman you saw was betraying everything we've sworn to defend. How do I know that's true? How do I know you're not just covering up a mistake? Agent Harper placed a thick folder on the table between them. This contains evidence of her activities over the past 18 months. Financial records showing payments from foreign intelligence services, photographs of her meeting with known operatives, intercepted communications discussing the sale of classified materials. She was a traitor, Captain Rodriguez. Marcus opened the folder and began reading, his heart sinking with each page. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank transfers from shell companies linked to hostile foreign governments, surveillance photos showing the woman meeting with known foreign agents, transcripts of recorded conversations discussing the sale of nuclear research data. If the documentation was genuine, then the woman he'd tried to help was indeed a spy who had been attempting to sell some of America's most sensitive secrets to hostile foreign powers. The crash hadn't been an accident. It had been a successful counterintelligence operation. But Marcus still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too perfectly organized, and the federal agents' responses too rehearsed. He'd been in the military long enough to recognize a cover story when he heard one. I want to speak with her personally. I want to hear her side of the story. Agent Harper's expression hardened. "That's not going to happen, Captain. She's being held under the Espionage Act, and she's not allowed contact with unauthorized personnel." "Then I want to speak with my commanding officer privately." Colonel Williams glanced at the federal agents, then back at Marcus. "Captain, I'm afraid that's not possible at this time. This briefing is being conducted under federal authority, and all participants are required to remain present." Marcus realized that he was essentially being held prisoner, even though no one had used that word. The men in suits weren't just federal investigators. They were handlers, and their job was to ensure that he accepted the official version of events and never spoke about what he'd really seen. "What happens if I refuse to accept your version of events?" Agent Harper's smile was cold and calculating. "Captain Rodriguez, you've already committed several federal crimes today. Unauthorized possession of classified materials, interference with a federal investigation, and potentially obstruction of justice. However, given your service record and the unusual circumstances, we're prepared to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" "You can accept the official version of events, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and return to your duties with a letter of reprimand in your file. Or you can face federal charges that will result in a lengthy prison sentence and the destruction of your military career." Marcus felt trapped between impossible choices. He could accept their story and live with the knowledge that he'd been complicit in whatever had really happened, or he could fight back and face the full weight of the federal government's legal system. "I need time to think about this." "I'm afraid that's not possible, Captain. This decision needs to be made now." Colonel Williams leaned forward, her voice soft but urgent. "Marcus, please, take the deal. You have a wife and 2 kids. Don't throw your life away over something you can't change." Marcus thought about his family, about the life he'd built over 12 years of military service. His wife Rebecca was expecting their 3rd child, and his 2 young sons were counting on him to be there for them. But he also thought about the woman lying in the desert and the possibility that she'd been murdered by her own government. "If I sign your agreement, what guarantee do I have that this won't happen again? That other innocent people won't be killed to protect government secrets?" Agent Harper's expression didn't change. "Captain, you're not in a position to negotiate. You're being offered a chance to salvage your career and protect your family. I suggest you take it." Marcus looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. Colonel Williams looked genuinely concerned for his welfare, but the federal agents showed no emotion whatsoever. They were professionals who had done this before, and they would do it again if necessary. "I want to see the woman one more time. I want to confirm that she's alive and receiving proper medical care." "That's not possible." Then I'm not signing anything. The room fell silent for several long moments. Marcus could hear the ventilation system humming in the background and the distant sound of aircraft operations outside. Finally, one of the unnamed investigators spoke up. "Captain Rodriguez, perhaps we can arrange a brief, supervised visit, just to confirm that the subject is receiving appropriate care." Agent Harper looked surprised by his colleague's suggestion, but he didn't object. That might be possible under very controlled circumstances. Marcus felt a small surge of hope. If he could see the woman again, if he could confirm that she was alive and being treated properly, then maybe he could accept the official version of events. But if he discovered that she'd been eliminated to protect the cover story, then he'd know that he was dealing with something far more sinister than a counterintelligence operation. "I want to see her today, before I sign anything." "That can be arranged, but you'll be accompanied by federal agents at all times, and you'll be required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements before the visit." Marcus nodded his agreement, knowing that he was probably walking into another trap, but unable to resist the chance to learn the truth. The documents he'd gathered from the crash site had been reclaimed, but the images were burned into his memory. If the woman was indeed a spy, then some of those documents would have been evidence of her crimes. But if she was innocent, then the papers might have contained information that someone was willing to kill to protect. As the federal agents prepared to escort him to the secure facility where the woman was supposedly being held, Marcus wondered if he was about to witness the truth or participate in an elaborate deception designed to secure his silence. Either way, he knew that his life would never be the same. The drive to the secure facility took them deep into the Nevada desert, following unmarked roads that Marcus had never seen on any official maps. The convoy consisted of 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, and Marcus found himself in the middle vehicle with Agent Harper and one of the unnamed investigators. The landscape outside was barren and hostile, dotted with Joshua trees and rock formations that looked like ancient monuments to forgotten gods. Marcus had flown over this terrain countless times, but he'd never realized how extensive the military's presence was in this part of the desert. They passed several checkpoints manned by armed guards, and Marcus noticed that none of the facilities they encountered appeared on any of the charts he'd studied during his years of service. "Where exactly are we going?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence that had dominated the journey. Agent Harper glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to the road ahead. "The subject is being held at a medical facility that specializes in treating federal detainees. It's not a location that appears on public maps." "How convenient." "Captain Rodriguez, I understand your skepticism, But you need to understand that national security operations require a certain level of secrecy. The American people are protected by systems they never see and operations they never hear about. Marcus watched the desert landscape roll by and wondered how many secrets were buried in the sand. How many other pilots had been forced to make the same choice he was facing? How many other witnesses had been silenced by the promise of prison time or the threat of disgrace? The convoy turned off the main road and began following a narrow track that wound between rocky outcroppings. In the distance, Marcus could see a cluster of low buildings surrounded by high fences and guard towers. The facility looked more like a prison than a medical center, and Marcus felt his unease growing with each mile. As they approached the main gate, Marcus noticed that the guards were not wearing standard military uniforms. Instead, they were dressed in black tactical gear with no unit insignia or name tags. These were clearly private contractors, which meant that whatever was happening at this facility was being conducted outside of normal military channels. The vehicle came to a stop at a security checkpoint, where their credentials were carefully examined by armed guards. Marcus watched the process with growing concern, realizing that he was being taken to a place where normal legal protections might not apply. Agent Harper, what kind of facility is this exactly? It's a secure medical facility operated by the Department of Homeland Security. The subject is receiving appropriate medical care while being debriefed by federal investigators. It looks like a prison. Security is necessary when dealing with individuals who pose a threat to national security. The convoy proceeded through the gate and wound its way between the buildings toward what appeared to be the main complex. Marcus could see surveillance cameras mounted on every structure, and guards patrolling the perimeter with automatic weapons. Whatever this place was, it was designed to keep people from getting in or getting out. They came to a stop in front of a nondescript concrete building with no windows and a single steel door. Agent Harper turned to Marcus with a serious expression. Captain Rodriguez, what you're about to see is classified at the highest levels. You'll be required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements before entering the facility. Any attempt to discuss what you observe here with unauthorized personnel will result in immediate federal charges. Marcus nodded, though he was beginning to have serious doubts about the wisdom of his decision. He was being taken deeper into a world of secrets and lies, and he wasn't sure he'd be able to find his way back out. The steel door opened to reveal a sterile corridor lined with unmarked doors. The walls were painted institutional white, and the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made everything look cold and unwelcoming. Marcus followed Agent Harper down the corridor, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. They stopped at a door marked only with a number, 247. Agent Harper produced a key card and swiped it through a reader, causing the door to unlock with a soft electronic beep. The subject is sedated for medical reasons, but she's conscious and able to communicate. You have 15 minutes. The room beyond the door was small and windowless, containing only a hospital bed, a chair, and basic medical equipment. The woman Marcus had seen at the crash site was lying on the bed, connected to various monitoring devices. She looked pale and weak, but her eyes were alert and focused. As Marcus entered the room, the woman turned her head toward him and spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "You're the pilot who tried to help me." Marcus nodded, moving closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been in a plane crash." She attempted a weak smile. "Thank you for stopping. I wasn't sure anyone would find me." Marcus glanced at Agent Harper, who was standing near the door with his arms crossed. "I'm told you're receiving good medical care." The woman's expression grew more serious. "I need to tell you something. The crash wasn't an accident. They forced my plane down." Agent Harper stepped forward. "Ma'am, you're confused. Your aircraft experienced mechanical failure." The woman's eyes remained fixed on Marcus. "I was carrying evidence of government corruption, people in high places who were selling secrets to foreign powers. They tried to kill me to stop me from exposing them." Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was exactly the opposite of what the federal agents had told him. According to their story, she was the spy. According to her story, she was trying to expose spies. What kind of evidence? Financial records, communications, proof that officials in the Department of Energy were selling nuclear research data to hostile foreign governments. Agent Harper's voice was sharp with authority. "Ma'am, you're under federal investigation for espionage. These delusions are not helping your case." The woman struggled to sit up in the bed, her face contorted with pain and determination. "Captain, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Patterson. I work for the Department of Energy's Inspector General's office. I've been investigating a network of officials who have been selling classified nuclear research to foreign buyers." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. If she was telling the truth, then everything the federal agents had told him was a lie. But if she was lying, then she was an incredibly skilled actress who was putting on a performance designed to manipulate him. "Dr. Patterson, I've been told that you're the one who was selling secrets to foreign governments." She shook her head weakly. "That's what they want you to believe. The real traitors are the ones who tried to kill me. I was carrying evidence that would have exposed their network." Agent Harper moved closer to the bed. "Dr. Patterson, you're under federal investigation for espionage. These accusations are not supported by evidence. The evidence was in my briefcase, the documents that were scattered around the crash site. Did you recover them? Marcus glanced at Agent Harper, remembering the papers he'd gathered from the desert floor. Some documents were recovered from the scene. Captain, I need you to understand something. The people who brought you here are not federal agents. They're private contractors working for the same network I was investigating. They're going to kill me, and they're going to kill you too if you don't cooperate with their cover story. Agent Harper's hand moved toward his weapon. Dr. Patterson, you're becoming agitated. Perhaps we should end this visit. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The woman's words had the ring of truth, and Agent Harper's reaction suggested that she'd touched a nerve. But he also knew that trained spies were experts at manipulation, and he couldn't be certain who was telling the truth. Dr. Patterson, if what you're saying is true, then how do I know you're not just trying to manipulate me? She reached into the pocket of her hospital gown and pulled out a small device that looked like a flash drive. I managed to hide this when they searched me. It contains copies of all the evidence I gathered during my investigation. Bank records, communication intercepts, photographs of meetings between government officials and foreign agents. Agent Harper lunged forward, but Marcus was faster. He grabbed the flash drive from Dr. Patterson's hand and stepped back toward the door. Captain Rodriguez, you need to surrender that device immediately. It contains classified materials that you're not authorized to possess. Marcus looked down at the small device in his hand. It was no bigger than his thumb, but it potentially contained evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of government. Or it could contain proof that Dr. Patterson was indeed a spy who was trying to frame innocent people. I'm taking this to my commanding officer. If it contains evidence of criminal activity, then the proper authorities need to see it. Captain, I am the proper authority. That device contains classified information that could compromise ongoing operations. Dr. Patterson's voice was urgent and desperate. Captain, please don't give it to them. That flash drive contains the names of everyone involved in the conspiracy. If they get it back, they'll be able to eliminate all the witnesses. Marcus felt trapped between two impossible choices. He could trust the federal agents and hand over the device, potentially helping to cover up a conspiracy. Or he could trust Dr. Patterson and keep the device, potentially aiding a foreign spy in her attempts to damage national security. I need to examine the contents of this device before I make any decisions. Agent Harper's expression grew cold and dangerous. Captain Rodriguez, you are not authorized to view classified materials. Surrender the device immediately, or you will be arrested for violation of federal law. Marcus realized that he was facing a moment of truth that would define the rest of his life. He could comply with the agent's demands and spend the rest of his career wondering if he'd been complicit in a cover-up. Or he could trust his instincts and risk everything to uncover the truth. I'm keeping the device until I can determine its contents. Agent Harper reached for his weapon, but Marcus was already moving. He pushed past the agent and ran toward the door, the flash drive clutched tightly in his fist. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Patterson shouting warnings and Agent Harper calling for backup. Marcus burst through the door and found himself in the sterile corridor, unsure of which direction led to the exit. He could hear footsteps and shouting voices behind him, and he knew that his escape window was rapidly closing. He chose a direction at random and began running, his military training taking over as he navigated the maze of corridors and doorways. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the facility, and Marcus realized that his presence had triggered a full lockdown. As he rounded a corner, Marcus came face to face with two armed guards who were blocking his path. They were dressed in the same black tactical gear he'd seen throughout the facility, and their weapons were already drawn. "Stop right there, Captain. You're not authorized to be in this area." Marcus raised his hands, the flash drive still clutched in his right fist. "I'm a United States Air Force officer, and I'm conducting an investigation into potential criminal activity." One of the guards spoke into his radio. "We have the subject in custody, requesting instructions." Marcus listened to the crackling response and felt his heart sink. The voice on the radio was ordering the guards to use whatever force necessary to recover the device and secure the facility. "Gentlemen, I'm going to reach into my pocket and show you my military identification. I'm not armed, and I'm not a threat to anyone." The guards exchanged glances, and Marcus could see uncertainty in their eyes. They were obviously private contractors, not military personnel, and they weren't sure how to handle a situation involving an active-duty Air Force officer. "Captain, we're going to need you to surrender any devices or materials you may have taken from the facility." Marcus made a decision that would either save his life or end it. "I'm going to walk out of this facility, and you're going to let me go. The device I'm carrying contains evidence of criminal activity, and I'm taking it to the proper authorities." "Captain, we can't let you leave with classified materials." "Then you'll have to shoot a United States Air Force officer in the back." Marcus turned around and began walking away from the guards, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. Every step felt like it might be his last, and he waited for the sound of gunfire that would end his life. But the shots never came. The guards were trained to deal with criminals and terrorists, not uniformed military officers who were claiming to be conducting legitimate investigations. Their hesitation gave Marcus the opening he needed to reach the main corridor and continue his escape. As he approached the exit, Marcus could see sunlight streaming through the glass doors at the end of the corridor. Freedom was just a few dozen yards away, but he knew that the hardest part of his escape was still ahead of him. The doors burst open as he approached, and Agent Harper appeared with a team of armed men. They had anticipated his route and set up a trap to prevent his escape. "Captain Rodriguez, this is your final warning. Surrender the device immediately, or we will use force to stop you." Marcus looked at the men blocking his path and realized that he was completely surrounded. Behind him, the guards he'd encountered earlier were approaching with their weapons drawn. To his left and right, additional armed men were emerging from side corridors. "Agent Harper, I'm a United States Air Force officer investigating potential criminal activity. I'm not your enemy." "Captain, you're in possession of classified materials that you're not authorized to have. You've interfered with a federal investigation, and you've violated multiple federal laws. Surrender the device, and we can resolve this situation peacefully." Marcus felt the weight of the flash drive in his hand and wondered if its contents were worth dying for. He thought about his wife and children, about the life he was potentially throwing away. But he also thought about Dr. Patterson lying in that hospital bed, and the possibility that she was telling the truth about a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government. "I want to speak with my commanding officer. I want to turn this device over to proper military authorities." "That's not possible, Captain. This is a federal matter, and it will be handled through federal channels." Marcus realized that he was trapped in a situation where normal legal protections didn't apply. These men were operating outside the normal chain of command, and they had the authority to do whatever was necessary to protect their operation. "Dr. Patterson said you're not really federal agents. She said you're private contractors working for the same people she was investigating." Agent Harper's expression didn't change. "Dr. Patterson is a foreign spy who will say anything to avoid prosecution. She's trying to manipulate you into helping her escape justice." "Then let me examine the contents of this device. If it contains evidence of espionage, I'll hand it over immediately." "Captain, you're not cleared to view classified materials. The device must be surrendered to authorized personnel." Marcus looked around at the armed men surrounding him and realized that he was facing a choice between surrender and death. But as he weighed his options, he remembered something Dr. Patterson had said about the flash drive containing the names of everyone involved in the conspiracy. If the device really did contain evidence of government corruption, then the people trying to recover it might be the same people who were named in that evidence. Their desperate attempts to prevent him from examining its contents suggested that they had something to hide. "I'm going to make you a deal," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "I'll surrender the device, but only after I've had a chance to examine its contents in the presence of my commanding officer and a representative from the Inspector General's office." Agent Harper shook his head. "That's not acceptable, Captain. The device contains materials that could compromise ongoing operations." "Then we have a problem, because I'm not handing it over without some kind of independent verification of its contents." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Marcus surrounded by armed men who were clearly prepared to use force if necessary. But he also sensed that they were reluctant to harm a uniformed military officer without exhausting all other options. Finally, Agent Harper spoke into his radio in a voice too low for Marcus to hear. After a brief conversation, he turned back to Marcus with a grim expression. "Captain Rodriguez, I've been authorized to offer you a final compromise. You can examine the contents of the device in the presence of a federal magistrate and a representative from the Air Force Judge Advocate General's office. If the device contains evidence of criminal activity, it will be turned over to the proper authorities. If it contains classified materials related to ongoing operations, it will be returned to federal custody." Marcus considered the offer carefully. It wasn't exactly what he wanted, but it was better than being shot in a corridor of a secret facility in the Nevada desert. And it would give him a chance to determine whether Dr. Patterson was telling the truth or whether she was indeed a foreign spy. "I accept your offer, but I want the examination to take place at Nellis Air Force Base, not at another undisclosed location." Agent Harper consulted with his radio contact again before nodding his agreement. "That can be arranged, but you'll be in federal custody until the examination is complete." Marcus handed over the flash drive, knowing that he was taking a calculated risk. If the device contained evidence of a conspiracy, then the people now holding it might find a way to destroy or alter its contents. But if it contained evidence of Dr. Patterson's espionage activities, then he would have helped prevent a major security breach. As the federal agents placed him in handcuffs and escorted him toward a waiting vehicle, Marcus wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, keeping its secrets buried in the sand, while the convoy of black SUVs disappeared into the shimmering heat haze. The drive back to Nellis Air Force Base was conducted in complete silence, with Marcus handcuffed in the back seat between two armed guards. He watched the familiar landscape roll by and wondered if he would ever see his family again. The events of the past few hours had taken him into a world of secrets and lies where normal rules didn't seem to apply. As they approached the base, Marcus could see the distinctive silhouettes of fighter jets on the flight line. The sight of his F-16 parked in its assigned spot filled him with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. He'd spent the best years of his life in the cockpit of that aircraft, serving his country with honor and distinction. Now his career was effectively over, and he wasn't even sure he was on the right side of the conflict. The convoy proceeded directly to the base legal office, where Marcus was escorted into a secure conference room. The room was equipped with computers, secure communication equipment, and a large screen that could display classified materials. Agent Harper was already there, along with Colonel Williams, and a man in an Air Force uniform who introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell from the Judge Advocate General's office. "Captain Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell began, "I understand you've been involved in a situation that has raised questions about classified materials and national security. I'm here to ensure that your rights are protected and that any evidence is properly examined." Marcus felt a surge of relief at seeing a familiar Air Force uniform. "Colonel Mitchell, I believe I've uncovered evidence of criminal activity involving government officials. I need to examine the contents of a flash drive that was given to me by a woman who claims to be a Department of Energy investigator." Agent Harper placed the flash drive on the table between them. "Colonel Mitchell, this device was recovered from a federal crime scene. It contains classified materials that are part of an ongoing counterintelligence operation." Colonel Mitchell picked up the device and examined it carefully. "Captain Rodriguez, can you tell me how you came into possession of this device?" Marcus recounted the events of the day, from the scramble alert to his discovery of the crash site to his encounter with Dr. Patterson at the secure facility. He described the conflicting stories he'd been told, and his growing suspicion that something was not as it seemed. "Colonel Mitchell, I believe Dr. Patterson when she says she was investigating government corruption. The federal agent's attempts to prevent me from examining the contents of this device suggest that they're trying to hide something." Agent Harper's expression remained impassive. "Captain Rodriguez, Dr. Patterson is a foreign spy who was attempting to sell classified nuclear research to hostile governments. The device contains evidence of her espionage activities. Then let's examine its contents and determine who's telling the truth." Colonel Mitchell nodded and connected the flash drive to a secure computer system. The screen flickered to life, displaying a directory of files with names that suggested financial records, communication intercepts, and surveillance photographs. "Gentlemen, I'm going to examine these files systematically. If they contain evidence of criminal activity, We'll take appropriate action. If they contain classified materials related to legitimate operations, they'll be handled through proper channels. Marcus watched as Colonel Mitchell opened the first file, which appeared to be a financial record showing large money transfers between offshore accounts. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars moving between accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and other known havens for illicit funds. These appear to be records of payments made to officials in the Department of Energy, Colonel Mitchell observed. The amounts and timing suggest systematic corruption over a period of several years. Agent Harper leaned forward. Colonel, those records were fabricated by foreign intelligence services as part of a disinformation campaign. They're designed to discredit legitimate government officials. The next file contained communication intercepts that appeared to show government officials discussing the sale of classified nuclear research data. The conversations were damning, with participants openly discussing prices and delivery methods for sensitive materials. These communications appear to be authentic, Colonel Mitchell said. The technical details and classification levels suggest that the participants had access to genuine classified materials. Colonel Mitchell, those communications were intercepted as part of a counterintelligence operation. They show Dr. Patterson and her associates discussing the sale of classified materials to foreign buyers. Marcus studied the screen carefully. Agent Harper, I don't see Dr. Patterson's name anywhere in these communications. The participants are identified by code names, but none of them match her identity. Colonel Mitchell opened additional files, revealing surveillance photographs that showed various individuals meeting in locations around Washington, D.C. Some of the faces were familiar. High-ranking officials from the Department of Energy, Defense Department, and other agencies. These photographs appear to document a systematic pattern of meetings between government officials and individuals who are known to be associated with foreign intelligence services, Colonel Mitchell observed. Agent Harper's composure was beginning to crack. Colonel, you're looking at evidence from a counterintelligence operation. Those photographs were taken during authorized surveillance activities. Then, why do the metadata show that they were taken by Dr. Patterson using personal equipment? And why do the accompanying reports describe them as evidence of criminal activity? Marcus felt a surge of vindication as the truth began to emerge. Dr. Patterson had been telling the truth. She was an investigator who had uncovered a conspiracy involving high-ranking government officials. The federal agents who had been trying to silence her were part of the same network she'd been investigating. Colonel Mitchell, I believe Dr. Patterson is in danger. The people who are holding her are not legitimate federal agents. They're private contractors working for the same officials she was investigating. Agent Harper stood up abruptly. Colonel Mitchell, this examination is over. These materials are part of an ongoing federal investigation, and they cannot be discussed with unauthorized personnel. Agent Harper, I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. As a representative of the Air Force Judge Advocate General's office, I have the authority to examine any materials that may be relevant to the conduct of military personnel. Marcus watched as the confrontation escalated, realizing that he was witnessing the collapse of a carefully constructed cover story. The evidence on the flash drive was overwhelming, and even Agent Harper's attempts to discredit it were becoming increasingly desperate. Colonel Mitchell, I need to ask you to contact the Department of Energy's Inspector General's office immediately. They need to know that one of their investigators is being held at an unauthorized facility. Agent Harper's hand moved toward his weapon. Colonel, you're interfering with a federal investigation. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the computer. Colonel Mitchell's expression hardened. Agent Harper, I'm a United States Air Force officer conducting an examination of evidence in the presence of a federal magistrate. If you have concerns about the legitimacy of this examination, you can file an appeal through proper channels. The tension in the room was palpable as the two men faced each other across the conference table. Marcus realized that he was witnessing a confrontation between legitimate law enforcement and the corrupt network that Dr. Patterson had been investigating. Colonel Mitchell, I believe Agent Harper and his associates are not legitimate federal agents. They're private contractors who are working to cover up the crimes documented on this flash drive. Agent Harper's facade finally cracked completely. Captain Rodriguez, you have no idea what you're dealing with. The people named in those files are protected by the highest levels of government. If you try to expose them, you'll be destroyed. Are you threatening a United States Air Force officer? I'm telling you the truth about how the world really works. Some secrets are too important to be exposed, regardless of the cost. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that Agent Harper had just admitted to being part of a conspiracy to cover up criminal activity. The man who had been presenting himself as a federal law enforcement officer was actually a corrupt operative who was willing to commit murder to protect his network. Colonel Mitchell was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling base security immediately. Agent Harper, you and your associates are under arrest for impersonating federal officers and threatening military personnel. Agent Harper laughed bitterly. Colonel Mitchell, you're making a mistake that will cost you your career. The people I work for have connections at the highest levels of government. They can make you disappear without a trace. Agent Harper, I've served my country for 22 years, and I've never been threatened by a criminal pretending to be a federal agent. Base security is on their way, and you're going to be held in military custody until this situation is resolved. Marcus watched as the confrontation reached its climax, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether justice would be served or whether the conspiracy would succeed in covering up its crimes. The evidence on the flash drive was damning, but he knew that powerful people had ways of making evidence disappear. As Colonel Mitchell placed his call to base security, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He memorized as much information from the flash drive as possible, knowing that Dr. Patterson's life might depend on his ability to remember the details of her investigation. The conference room door burst open as base security personnel arrived, their weapons drawn and ready for action. Agent Harper and his associates were quickly surrounded and disarmed, their credentials confiscated for examination. Colonel Mitchell, these men are not legitimate federal agents, the security chief reported. Their credentials are high-quality forgeries, but they don't match any authorized personnel in federal databases. Marcus felt a surge of relief and vindication. Dr. Patterson had been telling the truth, and the men who had been trying to silence her were indeed corrupt operatives working for the criminal network she'd been investigating. Colonel Mitchell, we need to get to Dr. Patterson immediately. She's being held at an unauthorized facility, and her life is in danger. Colonel Mitchell nodded grimly. Captain Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to provide detailed information about the location of this facility. We're going to mount a rescue operation immediately. As Marcus began describing the route to the secret facility, he realized that his decision to trust his instincts had been correct. He'd risked everything to uncover the truth, and now that truth was finally coming to light. But he also knew that the powerful people named in Dr. Patterson's investigation would not give up easily. They had too much to lose, and they would use every resource at their disposal to protect their criminal network. The battle for justice was just beginning, and Marcus Rodriguez had become an unwitting soldier in a war that most Americans never knew existed. The Nevada desert had revealed its secrets, but the cost of that revelation would be measured in the lives of those brave enough to expose the truth.